Sashi Tharoor lies about India innovation and technology.
Dr. Sashi Tharoor, diplomat, bureaucrat, and politician.
Thank you and good morning to all of you. Ravi, technology won't let me down because I have my notes already written down. So good to see you all this morning. It's a pleasure to be at what's been billed as the I3 Summit, organized by the Khaleej Times, and to have the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about how I, from my perspective anyway, see the importance of innovation. I will, of course, be talking a little bit more about my own experience from back home in India and certain lessons that perhaps all of you here too could learn from the Indian experience. But I will try and broaden the perspective beyond that in the small time we have available. Now, there's a growing appreciation of the importance of innovation. And of course, entrepreneurship is of no surprise to anybody in this room because it demonstrates society's growing faith in the potential of innovation and entrepreneurship to solve traditional age-old problems that many societies still continue to struggle with. For across the world, I would say, nations are increasingly transitioning to entrepreneurship-driven models, economies that are being run, as the Americans have been for a long time, on the basis of entrepreneurship. And innovation is clearly, therefore, the key to unlocking success stories in such economies.
Claim 49. India transition to an entrepreneurship-driven economy like the US. Exaggeration. Misleading. India has a burgeoning startup scene but is far from an entrepreneur-driven economy.
Fresh ideas, fresh thinking. I think it was Steve Jobs who said the thing he looks for most is out-of-the-box thinking, because everybody else is inside the familiar comforts of inside-the-box thinking. And these are therefore the kinds of ideas that are going to occupy us today, driven by factors such as the availability of both domestic and international funding, consolidation activities by a number of firms, the evolving technology space with dizzyingly rapid change, and a burgeoning demand for new products and services within the domestic market. Startups have permeated our landscape in India, and there's undeniably a global embrace of innovation and entrepreneurship as a powerful tool through which nations can find new answers to age-old questions. Now, when you start talking about innovation, I have a little weakness for words, so I thought I'd look up the etymology of the word, and it's got an interestingly turbulent history. The term is derived from the Latin word innovatus, which means to renew or to restore. But for the better part of its brief history as a word in the English language, innovation was actually a derogatory term, not a complimentary one. It was used in English to describe ideas, initiatives, products that were untested or untried, and therefore carried an implicit element of risk. The redemption of the concept of innovation came with the influential 20th century economist Joseph Schumpeter, who saw innovation as the greater end product of any successful invention and as a precursor to development, locating entrepreneurship on the pathway between the two. And of course, today we speak more and more of disruptive innovation. Disruption is following the same roadmap. It used to be a negative term. It's now becoming more and more positive. Now, as an Indian MP, and obviously standing here in a room with a rather large number of my compatriots present as well, let me point out that the key terms of innovation and disruption have a long and embedded history in the development of our country.
Claim 48. Key terms like innovation and disruption have a long history in India's development. Misinformation. Disruption was not used in India's history. Buzzwords should not replace historical analysis.
In the land of Ayurveda.
Claim 2. The land of India is the land of Ayurveda. Misinformation. While Ayurveda originated in ancient India, it is not the sole defining feature of the country today. India has much more diversity than just Ayurveda.
A country that invented the zero. Sometimes it looks as if all we invent these days is zero, but at one point we did actually come up with that. The Arabs borrowed it, making the decimal system possible.
Claim 3. India invented the zero, making the decimal system possible. Misinformation. The origins of zero are unclear. The concept developed in multiple ancient cultures, not just India. The decimal system predates the zero.
The land of the first recorded instance of rhinoplasty surgery over 2,000 years ago.
Claim 4. India has the first recorded instance of rhinoplasty surgery over 2000 years ago. Misinformation. The earliest evidence for rhinoplasty is found in ancient Egypt, not India. The timeline and origin are disputed.
The tradition of innovation is not a new one in our society.
Claim 46. India has a tradition of innovation, not just in modern times. Clarity. True, but glosses over periods of stagnation and decline in India's ancient and medieval past.
But one could argue that the contemporary interest in innovation stems from the remarkable and proven record of Indians in globally recognized innovation hubs like Silicon Valley.
Claim 47. Contemporary interest in innovation stems from Indians' record in Silicon Valley. Misinformation. An oversimplification. Interest arose from many factors, including India's own IT boom,
which towards the end of the 20th century saw the proliferation of a number of startups helmed by Indians. In fact, I was looking up the statistics recently, and it seems that 13.4% of all the startups that originated in Silicon Valley in the 80s, 90s, and the first decade of the 21st century were founded by Indians.
Claim 5. Indians founded many startups in Silicon Valley in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Clarity. While some successful startups had Indian immigrant founders, many did not. Contributions were diverse, not just Indian.
Many of which have gone on to become household names across the world, and that 40% of all Silicon Valley companies have Indians amongst their founders or in their leadership.
Claim 6. 40% of Silicon Valley companies have Indians amongst their founders or leadership. Lies. This statistic seems exaggerated. Data on founders' ethnicities is limited. Leadership diversity data does not support such high numbers.
Together with their historic aptitude for adaptability and entrepreneurial strengths,
Claim 1. Indians have a historic aptitude for adaptability and entrepreneurial strengths. Misinformation. This is a broad generalization that may not be true for all Indians. Adaptability and entrepreneurship depend on individual circumstances.
This, of course, became an idea that inevitably had to catch on back in the home country. And today, the Indian city of Bangalore or Bengaluru is recognized as the Silicon Valley of India, though really it should be a Silicon Plateau rather than a valley because that's where it's situated.
Claim 7. The Indian city of Bangalore is recognized as the Silicon Valley of India. Misinformation. While a tech hub, Bangalore is very different from Silicon Valley in scale, industry makeup, investment, and innovation output.
It's also, of course, got competition. There's a place near Mumbai, right near the IIT there, that is jokingly called Powai Valley for the increasing number of startups that are located there.
Claim 8. Mumbai is jokingly called Powai Valley for the increasing number of startups located there. Lies. The name Powai Valley is not widely used. Many major startups are not based there. It is an exaggeration of Mumbai's startup scene.
From Oyo to Ola, Indian startups are taking on strong competition in the global landscape.
Claim 9. Indian startups like Oyo and Ola are taking on strong global competition. Lies. Very few Indian startups have managed global scale so far. Competition remains overwhelmingly American and Chinese.
And many Indian companies have now joined the prestigious ranks of global unicorns, the nomenclature for privately held startups that are valued at over $1 billion, an expression coined at one time by Eileen Lee because of their rarity, like unicorns, and maybe even the mythicism of their possibility, also like unicorns. But now unicorns are proliferating everywhere, so are they in India, far from extinct.
Claim 10. Many Indian companies have joined the ranks of global unicorns. Clarity. India has over 100 unicorns, but that is still small compared to the total of over 1,000 unicorns globally.
In fact, we're seeing lots of drivers, for example, in the Indian state of Orissa. They have created a new concept called nano unicorns for small businesses and young ventures, which promotes skill development in the state of Odisha and business capabilities for individuals who display distinct entrepreneurial traits.
Claim 12. The Indian state of Orissa created nano unicorns for small businesses and young ventures. Misinformation. This is an isolated state initiative. Nano unicorn is not a widely recognized term or achievement benchmark.
Could be the owner of a manufacturing unit, could be a roadside Indian street food vendor, and he would be eligible for that kind of support. India generally has boasted an increase of 50% in startups concerned with advanced technology, especially in the Internet of Things and data analytics, setting the pace globally in tandem with the amplification of entrepreneurial diversity in India. And I think as AI has captured imagination, we're going to see a lot happening in that space as well.
Claim 13. India has seen a 50% increase in startups concerned with advanced technology. Lies. The data source is unclear. India's tech startups are still nascent and account for a small portion of startups.
The manner in which there is such a proliferation of startups within the country, where India is now boasting the world's third largest startup ecosystem, with over 90,000 startups registered last year under the Department for the Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. And that's not even the full year, it's only up to May this year.
Claim 11. India boasts the world's third largest startup ecosystem with over 90,000 startups. Misinformation. The definition of startup varies. By number of unicorns, funding and scale, India's ecosystem is still developing.
But to be sure, the growing popularity of a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship is not limited to India alone. I'm very aware of that, and I know that a similar story can be told here in the UAE as well. In your endeavor to diversify your economy and reduce the level of reliance on oil-based revenue, the UAE has emerged as a global hub for innovation and entrepreneurship as well. Rapid progress has been made, culminating in remarkable achievements such as ranking first in the Global Entrepreneurship Index in 2022, ahead of larger economies. The presence and deployment of widely available capital here has obviously played a key role. And I was looking at the 2022 Magnet Venture Investment Report, which says that UAE-based startups accounted for 26% of all transactions across the MENA region and 45% of capital deployed across the Middle East and North Africa in 2022, with the number of investors financing UAE startups in 21 growing by a phenomenal 54% when compared to 2020. So there's been some astonishing progress in this country as well. With the UAE's digital economy estimated to grow to about $140 billion by 2031, it's a little surprise that fintech and e-commerce startups are particularly thriving in this country. After all, the joke about Dubai used to be do buy, and people are certainly going to look to the UAE to buy things a lot. And these two sectors are accounting for 36% of all transactions registered in the UAE in 2021. And all this is very well documented. I know I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Success stories like the sale of the ride-hailing app Careem, the nation's first unicorn, to Uber in 2019 for $3.1 billion, Amazon's purchase of local e-commerce startup Souk.com. These are all stories that many of you must be familiar with. And finally, as an Indian, it is a matter of some pride to note that 30% of the startups in the UAE, according to the Dubai Chamber of Commerce, are owned or operated by Indians.
Claim 14. 30% of startups in the UAE are owned or operated by Indians. Lies. Statistics on the ethnicity of UAE startup owners seems dubious. Majority are likely local Arabs and expats from many countries,
and are responsible for the creation of over 1 million jobs in this country.
Claim 15. Indians are responsible for the creation of over 1 million jobs in the UAE. Exaggeration. This is likely an exaggeration. Total expat population in UAE is under 5 million, making 1 million jobs unlikely.
Statistics that only reflect the inherent entrepreneurial spirit of the people of both India and the UAE but also, I would say, the vibrant nature of the relations shared between our two countries. Now, the phenomenal rise of entrepreneurs both in India and here in the UAE, which is a trend reflected globally, also shows how ambitious and talented individuals today are abandoning the traditional path of what would constitute the traditional career, good education, good profession, good career in a company, and so on. We're moving away from that culture into one of entrepreneurship as a way not just to success in individual careers, but as a tool to establish your own legacies. Today, the options we have available are so much greater than they ever used to be. I remember from my own college days how few were the options available for graduating youngsters in the India of the late 60s, early 70s. Even within the higher education system, there were so few subjects you could study. And today there are so many more. There are courses available that didn't even exist in my college days.
Claim 23. There are courses available in India today that didn't exist a few decades ago. Clarity. True but obvious. This is true for most countries with educational development and globalization.
And far more jobs and options for careers are available to today's young people than my generation could even have dreamed of back then.
Claim 24. There are more jobs and career options available to India's youth than previous generations. Clarity. Likely true due to economic growth, but still lacks nuance. Unemployment and underemployment remain high in India.
So the nations of the world, which used to operate more or less in silos with limited options for international exposure for people growing up in a society like India.
Claim 25. Globalization has transformed India from operating in silos to having international exposure. Exaggeration. Globalization has connected India more, but operating in silos is an exaggeration of India historically.
And of course, the term globalization hadn't even been coined at that time. All of that today has transformed itself into a smaller world with opportunities that are far greater. And of course, our youth, whether in the UAE or in India, have a wide variety of choices in and outside our countries that were unknown in previous eras.
Claim 26. India's youth have more choices inside and outside the country than previous eras. Clarity. Largely true but quite obvious. Same is true for youth worldwide compared to previous generations.
And so one could argue that in many ways the best is yet to come. As an Indian, for example, I'm very conscious of the fact that we are the youngest major economy in the world.
Claim 16. India is the youngest major economy in the world. Misinformation. Median age defines demographic trends, not youngest economy. By median age, India is not the youngest major economy.
At a time when many of our potential Asian competitors like China, Japan, or South Korea are facing a serious demographic squeeze, and the rest of the world is aging. In Europe, the average age is now already 46. In Japan, it's crossed 47. And even in youthful immigrant-fueled America, it's already hitting 40. The average age in India is only 29.
Claim 17. The average age in India is only 29. Lies. UN data shows India's average age was 28 in 2020. It is projected to be 31 by 2025, not still only 29.
So we have a huge young population, almost 50% under 25.
Claim 18. Nearly 50% of India's population is under 25. Misinformation. Close but inaccurate. India has over 50% under age 26 as of 2020, but less than 50% under 25.
And approximately 65% of our population under 35.
Claim 19. Approximately 65% of India's population is under 35. Lies. False. World Bank data shows around 57% under 35 as of 2020.
So a young country with fresh graduates will be joining a dynamic, competitive, productive, and youthful workforce. And that, of course, could make us, I say could very consciously, an engine of the world, the kind of role that China played back in the 80s and 90s.
Claim 20. India has a huge young population that could make it an engine of the world. Misinformation. Misleading speculation. Having a young population does not automatically lead to economic growth as claimed.
But the age structure is obviously not enough. That's just one comparative advantage. But the demographic dividend that we in India keep talking about will only be a dividend and not a disaster if we can educate and train our young people better to seize the opportunities available to them in the 21st century. Opportunities that entrepreneurs like all of you are creating there as well as here.
Claim 22. India needs to educate and train its young people to seize 21st century opportunities. Clarity. True, this is a widely acknowledged need. But the claim overstates it as the sole or primary obstacle.
Here, I get a very positive sense of the world is your oyster. There are no limits. You can do pretty much any kind of innovation, and there will be a market, an audience, capital, all of that. In India, we aren't obviously there yet, and there's a lot of question marks still, because the risk for a society like India, and this is true of some other Arab countries, not the ones in the Gulf, is the risk of producing legions of undereducated or even uneducated, underemployed or unemployed, and sometimes unemployable young men. And I say men because the great danger in many of our societies is precisely frustrated young men who feel they have no stake in the society or the economy, no options, and might want to break free through the wrong sorts of temptations. In India, we've had Maoist attacks and incidents in 165 districts of the 707 districts in our country. And that's something that worries.
Claim 21. Maoist attacks have occurred in 165 of India's 707 districts. Clarity. The security challenges are real, but the situation is nuanced. Violence has declined overall in recent years.
To me, of course, in this part of the world, it's not Maoists that you need to think about, but unfortunately, violent young extremists of a different hue in this region. But this is where I think all of you come in, because harnessing our nation's potential, both our nations, and bringing about the social and economic transformation that we all hope for, will require undoubtedly entrepreneurship and innovation.
Claim 27. Harnessing India's potential requires entrepreneurship and innovation. Misinformation. Too simplistic. Realizing potential requires improving infrastructure, public services, healthcare, etc. Not just entrepreneurship.
And it's precisely you business leaders who can provide leadership across all sectors of the economy.
Claim 28. Business leaders in India can provide leadership across sectors of the economy. Exaggeration. Exaggerates the role and influence of business leaders in developing diverse sectors.
We need to see very much more happening to connect the business world to the universities, to where young people are being trained.
Claim 29. Connecting India's business world to universities is important. Clarity. True, though all sectors need better connection to education training to strengthen workforce.
We need to ensure that startups, whether in the UAE or in India, have the opportunity to have access to know-how, to knowledge. You often also have the problem that people sometimes come up with an excellent idea, but unfortunately they don't find access to capital. That's certainly a problem many young entrepreneurs have faced in India, perhaps less so in the UAE.
Claim 30. Ensuring startups in India have access to knowledge and capital is key. Misinformation. Access to knowledge and capital helps, but many other inputs are key for startups to succeed.
But all of this leads me to underscore the point that the burgeoning entrepreneurial ambitions of the young in both our countries will be significant for the future of economic growth in both the UAE and in India. Whether you're creating a brand India or a brand UAE, you do have to, of course, have access to all of these things. And in certainly a country like India, the scope for micro, small, and medium level entrepreneurial ventures is more important than ever.
Claim 31. Micro, small and medium entrepreneurial ventures are important in India. Clarity. True, MSEs employ most of India's workforce, but ignores larger structural reforms needed.
Some will succeed, a number will fail, but they will, in the trying, energize our economic spaces and throw up, I hope, the kinds of minds and talents that all economies need to move forward. In many ways, the right mindset is half the battle won. And I think you have that here. We believe many Indians have it in India. We need to make sure that that's a widespread attitude. Now, to overcome the challenges, obviously we all have to encourage creativity, because it's one thing to have a spirit of enterprise, but innovation requires the ability to think out of the box, as I mentioned earlier.
Claim 32. India needs to encourage creativity and out-of-the-box thinking. Cliché. Creativity and innovation are important, but cliched as a prescription for India's development needs.
In India, at one point, there was perhaps too much of a celebration of the Indian practice of jugaad, which is essentially coming up with makeshift solutions.
Claim 33. Jugaad is about thinking out of the box and making do with limited resources. Clarity. Jugaad has its merits but is an overused buzzword. Should not be romanticized.
In fact, when I opened, I was invited to inaugurate about a decade ago at the University of Toronto's Monk School, a center for the study of Indian innovation. And jugaad was the big theme going around in those days, just a decade ago. But the fact is that critics have been attacking this notion of jugaad as simply a way in which Indians twist their way around the system, especially in situations of scarcity, to get things done by cutting corners. And they say this is not good enough. You're just making do, whereas real innovation is about high quality excellence and not just making do. But I think that criticism is a little overblown, because jugaad is more than that. It's about ways of thinking out of the box, as I said, to repurpose things, to make do with what you've got within your resource constraints.
Claim 34. Jugaad shows how Indians invent solutions under constraints. Clarity. Partly true, but jugaad-style frugal DIY innovation has limitations for major development issues.
To create solutions, think creatively, and often in non-traditional ways, with traditional objects or to traditional tasks. I'll give you an example. An Indian villager constructs a makeshift vehicle to transport his livestock and goods by rigging a wooden cart, which normally would have been yoked to a bullock, with an irrigation hand pump that serves as an engine. That's a good example. Common machines and household objects are reincarnated in ways that the original manufacturers could never have intended. For example, in our Indian state of Punjab, in the hot summer months, everyone enjoys drinking lassi. Many of you know what lassi is. You can have it salty, you can have it sweet. It's a buttermilk drink. And because vast quantities have to be churned out all the time, Punjabi entrepreneurs have figured out that the most sensible way of making large quantities of lassi is not by investing in ever larger mixers and so on, is by repurposing washing machines to be able to churn the lassi. And they've been doing that. If you can't afford your mobile phone bill if you're a student at university, you invent the concept of the missed call, where you call your folks and they know one ring means that the parents know they have to call you back. That is again an example of Indian jugaad in some ways. Instead of complicating and refining their products, Indian innovation often strips them down to the bare essentials, making them affordable, accessible, durable, and effective.
Claim 35. Jugaad often strips products down to bare essentials in India. Misinformation. Some examples of this exist, but it is not a good characterization of Indian innovation overall.
Many of you heard of the Tata Nano, which was an innovation product, was an extremely successful innovation. It didn't work in marketing terms because no one wanted to be associated with buying and owning the cheapest car in the market. But it was actually also the most innovative, and if the Tatas had thought of selling it that way, it might have been a bigger hit.
Claim 43. India pioneered innovative products like the Tata Nano car and shampoo sachets. Misinformation. Nano failed commercially. Sachets were pioneered in America before introduced to India. Weak examples.
So my point is that there's nothing wrong with thinking out of the box and coming up with limited resources, and yet finding solutions. Now, I don't want to take too long because you're also going to hear from me again towards the end of our meeting in a conversation with one of you on some of the issues that I've been trying to raise here. I do want to stress, of course, that in doing all of this, and maybe you'll forgive me for sounding a bit political here, we mustn't forget the poor and the marginalized in every society who need to be part of this adventure we're talking about.
Claim 36. India must not forget the poor and marginalized who need to be part of the entrepreneurial adventure. Poor framing. Inclusive development is important, but framing it as adventure seems insensitive and inappropriate.
The magic of the market will not appeal to people who cannot afford to enter the marketplace. And so we need to be able to incorporate solutions. This is partially where Jugaad comes in, but it's not only about that. It's about supporting growth and distributing the fruits of growth to those who can today be counted amongst the poor and the excluded, but tomorrow could be the consumers of the future. There's been a very recent Oxfam report that showed that the assets of the 9 richest people in the world are more or less equal to the combined wealth of 50% of the world's population. Now, that's perhaps not something we can all easily correct, but certainly in the Indian context and as a public servant in India, as a politician, I've often said that whether we grow at 9% as we once did or 6 or 7% as we're doing now, we can't forget that the real focus of all policy, growth, development must be on a different number, the bottom 25% of our population.
Claim 37. India's growth must focus on the bottom 25% of the population. Clarity. Agree on need for inclusive growth, but single statistical benchmark oversimplifies complex policy issues.
But at the same time, I want to stress that the ability to have the confidence to back yourself to do something that's never been done before is intrinsic to the success of all innovation. And when we speak about innovation, it's not just about inventing a wholly new product.
Claim 42. Innovation in India is not just inventing a wholly new product but a new way to make or market a product. Clarity. True, but hardly unique to India. This applies to innovation globally.
It could be a different way of inventing a new product. It could be a different consumer base for a product. You all remember how when some of the multinational companies realized that there was a market for their shampoos in Indian villages, but no one could afford to buy a huge bottle, they invented the concept of the shampoo sachet, where for a trivial amount of money, 5 rupees, you could actually buy shampoo in sachets because you couldn't afford to lay out the 65 or 70 rupees for a bottle in those days at one go. That kind of thing is also innovation. My favorite story of that kind of complete innovation was when Jamshedji Tata, the great Indian industrialist of the 1890s, was denied admission to Pike's Hotel in Bombay at the peak of the British Empire. Pike's Hotel used to have a sign, apparently, which he had failed to notice, saying that Indians and dogs not allowed. So what did he do? He went off and built a grander, far more opulent, far more classy hotel that was open to Indians, the Taj Mahal Hotel.
Claim 39. Jamshedji Tata built the Taj Mahal Hotel after being denied entry to a British hotel. Clarity. True, but admits that it was financed by profits from Tata's steel mills for the British Raj.
And I don't know about the dogs, but the Indians certainly thrived going to that hotel, and the result was that the Taj is considered one of the finest hotels in the world today, whereas Pike's has long since been closed. The same Mr. Tata set up India's first steel mill in 1905 in the face of implacable British hostility.
Claim 40. Jamshedji Tata set up India's first steel mill despite British hostility. Missing context. Glosses over the fact that Tata Steel profited by supplying rails for British colonial expansion.
And the colonial official at that time, the then chairman of the Railway Board, sneered that he would personally eat every ounce of steel that an Indian was capable of producing. It's a pity he didn't live long enough to see the descendants of Jamshedji Tata taking over what remained of British steel through its acquisition of Chorus and then selling it because it was such an unviable business. But that would have given this gentleman a very bad case of indigestion. But I'm making this point not just for post-colonial reasons, but rather to remind you that it's time to set aside the old stereotypes of who can do what, who cannot do what. In this today's globalizing world, everything can be done by everyone.
Claim 38. Indians have shown they can do what was previously thought impossible. Exaggeration. Too big and hyperbolic. Individual stories do not define the capabilities of all Indians.
We just need entrepreneurs who can lead, who can innovate, who can inspire, who can reach out beyond the limits that their forerunners have lived with in the past.
Claim 41. India needs entrepreneurs to lead, innovate, inspire, and reach out beyond limits. Cliché. Entrepreneurship helps but is not a panacea. Real progress involves many complex systemic factors.
Break these taboos and barriers and come up with a commitment to both quality that can work across all areas, as well as of new ideas being welcome rather than frowned upon by those who just want to do things in the old conventional way.
Claim 50. Fresh ideas and thinking are key to unlocking success in entrepreneurship-driven economies like India. Cliché. Cliché truism not credible is insightful analysis of India's development needs.
So let me end by saying that today, as all of you gather here as entrepreneurs and to discuss innovation, I think it's important to think in terms constantly of the next new venture that you can think about setting up, that as motivated and mature individuals, you will make exceptional contributions, I've no doubt, to the vast pool of knowledge, wealth, and creativity in the world.
Claim 44. India needs mature individuals who will make exceptional contributions. Cliché. Too big to be a meaningful statement about India's development needs.
And as leaders in your own right, I'm sure you will carry the weight of the countless, nameless, faceless people who also rely on your skill, your dedication, your talent to help them too build a better tomorrow.
Claim 45. India needs leaders who will help build a better tomorrow. Cliché. Cliché statement that applies broadly, not specifically to India.
Now, it would be odd for an Indian politician to end a speech without quoting Mahatma Gandhi, so let me do that, live up to your expectations. Not one of his better known quotes. He once said, "It is the quality of our work which will please God and not the quantity." I think it was actually a surprisingly good message from Mahatma Gandhi. And he, of course, more famously declared, "Be the change that you wish to see in the world." I think since quality will not come without change, I think the exhortations apply to all of us in this room. Change yourselves to change the world, and do so with work and values of the highest quality. I think these thoughts of Mahatma Gandhi can illuminate your quest and ours for continued accomplishment in all aspects of your work. And I hope that your deliberations today turn out to be stimulating, productive, and successful. Thank you very much. Have a great meeting.